click on that subscribe button if you haven't subscribed yet, and like this video so that it can reach the wider viewer. Enjoy this episode. Guest today is a globally seasoned healthcare educator and trauma specialist whose work expands from orthopedics to expedition medicine and special forces training. His impact in LMIC trauma care has earned him an honorary fellowship from City University of London. Without further ado, I want to welcome Team Beacon. Team, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm good. I'm being very well, very busy. Spent some time in Ethiopia and was up at Gondo recently where we first came across each other. So yeah, and the organisation is busy. So yeah, life, if you do this type of work, is never dull.
For sure, for sure. You are one busy man, I know that.
Yeah.
So let's just dive right into it. You have such an amazing career, from trauma care to orthopedic medical devices, to global health, right? So how did this unique journey lead to the creation of Made Aid, which is how you and I actually first met? And what was the vision that originally inspired it?
Sure. It's really interesting actually, because I've always, as a kind of preemptive thing, always been interested in travel and have travelled widely anyway, both for sort of interest and as an outdoor pursuits instructor. And indeed, we have a grade in the UK called an operating department practitioner, which is kind of like a nurse level grade where you work in the operating room in anaesthetics on the scrub side and recovery or PACU, ICU type stuff, as well as kind of resuscitation teams. So when I worked in that, I just developed an interest in global health. So it's always something that fired my imagination from the absolute get-go, right from kind of my sort of early 20s, really, which is going back a long way now. It was interesting because one day for my birthday, my wife said, it's my 40th birthday, she said, you can have a party, you can go to Africa and see our friend who runs a hospital in southern Uganda. So I went out to Uganda to my friend's hospital in a kind of fairly typical mission hospital, Kazizi Hospital in the south. Fantastic trip. And but what really struck me was that they were doing amazing work, if you like, surgically, but just generally with the care that they were giving, whether it's mental health, just pediatric medicine, whatever. They were doing a fantastic work, but the equipment they had was truly atrocious. And I can remember, for instance, we had a really sick patient who needed a laparotomy. The operating table didn't wobbled. We had no monitoring, an appalling light. It was really, really bad. And so that really moved me. And my nature is I kind of don't like injustice. And if something's not right, I like to do something about it. And so I came back. By then, I'd also been working in medical devices, in trauma and hip and knees, mainly trauma. So, intramedullary nailing, Ilazarov. I helped bring the Taylor spatial frame into the UK and stuff like this. So at a multitude of levels, I was really well connected. And this is kind of when global health wasn't maybe as there wasn't so much interest in global health at the time by any stretch of the imagination. So I came home and I sourced all the equipment that they needed for this hospital, mainly around the operating room, but also for other areas of the hospital. And then I sent it out there, all of which was quite an epic. But I used a lot of common sense kind of when I did it to make sure they were getting the correct items. And medicine going back then, you're going back 24 years, was anyway, if you like, I would suggest more basic. So I got them their equipment and sent it out there. They were incredibly grateful. I had a lot of contacts in industry through my job as a trauma manager in Smith and Nephew, and then in Zimmer. So I knew a lot of people. I knew how industry worked, which is really important if you're going to try and get stuff off them. And yeah, sent it out there, and it had a really big clinical impact. And what's also interesting is that people often don't realise when you're supplying equipment, and you'll know this through the work with Rotary and the Leicester hospitals in Gonda, is the psychological impact it had, supporting them. They felt someone was batting for them and helping them. And they got kit, the equipment that meant they could treat their patients better. And in fact, they desperately needed a gastroscope and a colonoscope, I remember at the time. And so I spoke to Olympus. And for instance, knowing how industry works, they often have demonstration items like from the previous year, last year's model, and they gave me the whole systems free. So I could get that out to them, and it made their life so much easier, as I'm sure you can imagine. So that was how it started. And life is interesting, isn't it, when you do this stuff? Because and something I always say to people when they're talking about starting projects and they chat to us about things they're trying to do, I say you just got to start, and then success breeds success, and you can, but even if it's in a small way, you start and away you go. And so I did this one project, and if you can do that kind of stuff, people hear about it pretty quickly, as I'm sure you can imagine. And so that was interesting. So people started to contact me, and again, I just chatted up people, and I started, honestly, in Anya, to get the most incredible donations. A really big surgical instrument manufacturer, Downs, were bought by B. Braun. So I got given the entire stock of Downs surgical inventory, which was phenomenal. And so on. I got, just through the whole, if you like, networking process. And then I started to give, this is quite interesting as well, about making your own luck, really. When I was a national orthopedic manager for orthopedic trauma, we used to do training days, and I made them very holistic, which was unlike any of the other people, our competition, if you like. And one of the things I would do is give a talk, because I've been doing this by then for 3 or 4 years. Lots of people had contacted me, and I was doing all sorts of projects on the side of a very busy life. And anyway, I would give talks on surgery in Africa, it's a general interest talk. In this instance, I would talk a lot about orthopedic trauma with massive issue in LMICs or austere environments. And so all of our customers started to contact my reps and say, hey, can you give this equipment to Tim to send out to Africa? So I started to develop quite a supply chain, if you like. And it got to the point where I was so busy doing this, I managed to get a startup donation of money, not much, but just enough, because we're a social enterprise, so I couldn't do it for free. But what we did do, we sent enormous amounts of equipment for the money, and it evolved sort of a combination of buying equipment and getting pre-owned equipment and donations. So I then took the kind of monumental leap of faith to go full time. And I went full time about 17 years ago, and we've grown into a multi-million-pound global NGO, designing biomed courses, designing our own LMIC external fixator that's reusable, and just having a massive, massive impact. I employ 7 people now, and it's really exciting. But it came about through visiting that one hospital, seeing that they had a need, coming home and fixing it, doing something about the problem, and it literally just grew from there. It's a fairly classic story, really, isn't it?
Yeah, amazing. Um, I wouldn't say fairly classic, but but it's very inspirational because you went for vacation and then you saw a problem. You came back with a vision at heart and a goal, and you actually materialized it finally. And I know you've done so many amazing projects, not only in the African continent, but all over the world as well. But two things stood out for me when you were talking about it. um, one, it started when you're 40. Like, you already have had a career, which was a very successful career and things like that. And then you moved, you saw a problem, you wanted to solve it, and you made this shift. And also you said you make your own luck, which was kind of interesting for me to hear, because it's really not, luck is not really luck. It's what you've been building, right? So all the
Mm.
connections
Yeah,
and
yeah, I
networks
agree.
that, yeah, that you have built is really what came in as a big resource when you did
Mm.
the transferred into this social entrepreneurship and you know nonprofit work. So that's really amazing. I love that. Um,
Mm.
it's always interesting to me when you have, donations or pre-owned, pre-used equipment and things like that. There are a lot of challenges that also come
Oh,
with such resources. So what have you observed as the most persistent challenge in biomedical equipment management? Because getting it into the site is one thing, but managing it is a completely different beast on its own.
mm. Yeah.
So, what has been the persistent challenge that you have observed, especially comparing
Mm.
it to your home base, the UK, versus all this
Sure.
resource constrained settings that you're involved
Yeah.
in?
I could potentially, and Anya, talk for an hour on that subject really alone, but don't worry, you're safe. But there's in LMICs, whatever or low resource environments, um, the there's a whole bunch of factors really, and it kind of leads into the answer to your question. But like all these things, it's multifactorial. Um, and I think, kind of as part of that, the strength of medical aid internationally is we sort of are very pragmatic and we cut to the chase and we're not afraid to challenge, if you like. So the first massive issue, well, the first positive is you can utilizing pre-owned equipment, whether it's donations, whether it's been used in a hospital for X amount of years, is a very, very good way of maximizing budgets and really enhancing the project that you are doing. So we did a children's hospital in Guinea by sensible usage of donations, and all this ties into the biomedical engineering and everything as I'll come to, by using sensible donations that were appropriate. And I always say about donations, they've got to deliver a clinical need. It's not about the value of the donations, it's about delivering an appropriate clinical need that's sustainable and is appropriate for the environment. I think they paid $200,000 for this entire children's hospital, and we should work this out more, to be honest with you. But we worked out kind of on the back of a piece of paper. They probably had 200,000, £250,000 of the free stuff. But the free stuff was all largely, for instance, nowadays non-electric. So if we go back, except if we'd actually got a brand new unused X-ray machine that hadn't been used, it came out of a COVID hospital. So that was phenomenal. We've managed to do that a few times. But a lot of the really good gifts in kind can be patient trolleys, examination couches, drip stands, all sorts of stuff. And also with gifts in kind, it can also be the things that you wouldn't normally buy. And I will come on to the biomedical engineering in a minute. Because, for instance, people largely will give us their budget to spend. A little bit simplistic, but they'll kind of say, we want, either we've got this amount of money or this is what you want to achieve, how much will it cost? And also, it's a working in partnership that we guide very strongly. So, for instance, because you need to spend your money maybe on an ultrasound or an X-ray or an operating table or an anaesthetic machine, you're clearly not going to buy bedside cabinets, overbed tables, really nice chairs, that kind of furniture. But actually, there's a big supply chain of those, often that aren't used, which are really lovely to hospitals to have. So there's all sorts of really nice gifts in kind, sort of the stuff you wouldn't buy, but actually really, really helps the hospital. Now, we did a hospital in northern Ghana. It was actually during COVID. I think we sent 13, 14 containers out. It was, again, they had about, I don't know, £750,000 of the free stuff, £2.5 million project, 100 beds, 4 ORs, emergency, maternity, CT scanner, and everything. But every bed got a bedside locker. It got an overbed table. I think half the beds got an oxygen concentrator. We had a big donation of those, all of which we recycled. None of which would have sort of, they would have, they couldn't have afforded an oxygen concentrator for the amount we sent, or we would never have purchased out of their budget bedside lockers, etc. But we got them out of COVID hospitals, and it really, really made the hospitals look nice. And if we can and it's obviously nice for the patients, and that really boosts psychologically. So the first point I'm making is that when you're using when you're using donations of whatever sort, whether they come from a hospital or from a company, they have to be appropriate. Now, because if they're not, because this basically what happens is that this directly impacts the biomedical engineering side. So, and this is where you get into a really big problem, and we really, really, really try and address this. And we recently did a social media post on it, but it still happens so much. Is at this point, it's people send completely inappropriate donations. America, of course, in terms of electrical items, is on the wrong voltage. I know of one situation where 5 operating tables were brought new by an organisation in America. They were sent to Africa, no voltage regulator to take into account the difference in voltage, and they all blew up when they were plugged in. And the same organisation knew that we had our own CE marked NMIC operating table. Go figure. But the point is, things like monitors, they've got to go. When we send a patient monitor, it goes with 2 of each accessory: neonate, child, and adult. So you've got spares. Every monitor is the same brand in the hospital, so all the accessories interconnect, and so it goes on. And the problem is, which we see time and time and time again, is the donors. People chuck this stuff into containers and they think they're saving the world, and the reality is they're not. We've just done a burns unit in Africa, theatres, rehab, HDU, post-anesthetic care unit, wards, and so on. And it was a real privilege to do, because obviously burns is a massive issue. But 2 other containers came from other organisations, and unfortunately I couldn't get out there, but a really, really good friend of mine, a nurse who's so experienced in this field, she was absolutely furious at the rubbish that had been sent in these containers. She said, like, one of the items was like almost as old as she was, and she's like in her early 60s. I mean, it was just ridiculous. So, out of date consumables, or consumables randomly for, say, laparoscopic surgery, like when it just is, they're not going to be used, and they're single use, and so on. So the first point about kind of biomedical engineering is you make the biomedical engineer and the whole support infrastructure a lot easier if you send the correct equipment. There's a great quote by, and I can't remember his name, where he says, quality is remembered long after price is forgotten. And I say to people, you have to, raise money to get good kit, good equipment, or that's appropriate. So an anaesthetic machine, there's a whole bunch of stuff in that in terms of the top anaesthetic machine you get, because of consumables, soda lime that goes in for rebreathing ones, and so on. And there's really, really good LMIC anaesthetic machines available. So the point is, and we've done a big research studies on this, which I'm sure we'll come to later. The point about all this is that there's all these equipment graveyards where the equipment has never even been used, because sometimes they weren't even working when it got there, or it's very rapidly broken for whatever reason. So, as they, it's an age-old saying, isn't it? Prevention is better than a cure. And, you can prevent biomedical engineering problems by sending the correct equipment that is maintainable, because there's other issues with a lot of these donations. Often the items can be really, really old. So they're no longer supported by the company anyway. And the other thing you have to be careful when you manage all this stuff, some donations which come from companies because they don't want the equipment anymore anyway. They donate it and then they're not interested in supporting it if you do need spares. Some of them have got passwords that they won't give you the password code to get into the machine if there's an issue. So my point is, and all this has a direct impact, of course, on whoever's trying to maintain this stuff and make it work. I've been in major teaching hospitals, and they've got rebreathing anesthetic machines. In other words, you circulate the gas that's being breathed. But to do that, you need soda lime to absorb the CO2, and they haven't got any. They've never had any. The monitoring is not even taking this into account. And it's just really dangerous, and people die from bad anesthesia in these places. And so it's kind of also buy what you need, not what you wish needs. So there is a real, and we spend at Medical Aid International a lot of, I won't say a lot of time, but a fair amount of time these days managing donors and explaining to them that, we were offered a lorry load of out of date renal dialysis disposables the other week, and they couldn't understand why we wouldn't take them. And apart from the fact they were out of date by quite a bit, but also, of course, they were very machine specific. So the kind of first point, the most important point to make is prevent the biomedical engineering or the maintenance issues in the first place by sending correct equipment. And there's so many examples. Some fairly classic ones of what operating tables sent that are electric, which is they've got no battery backup or they're completely worn out. They don't send them with any accessories. And I've seen so many that don't work. We make our own manual that comes with all the accessories, and so on. So the big thing, first of all, with equipment is supply what they need, and donations can play a big part for sure. But if you're going to send them, you need to make sure they are appropriate. If it's electric, that they can be supported, and that you will then obviously have a good clinical outcome treating the patient. So that's kind of that's the first and foremost point. And you've seen equipment graveyards in all these hospitals like I have.
Yeah, you raised excellent points. Really, it is disheartening when you think, oh, okay, I'm gonna be able to get all this equipment that I use as a surgeon or as a physician that I'm gonna use for my patients, and it's gonna benefit them. And you're thinking like ahead of you, and then the equipment arrives, and like you said, sometimes the container actually, when it comes out of the container, it's not even usable. It's like I don't even understand how that happens, but it becomes it becomes very disappointing. And and then you have to dispose them. Let's not forget that part, right? Especially those that contain battery or anything that has radioactive substance and things like that. Disposing them is a whole other headache as well. So now you're not only not using it, not only it's not benefiting anyone, but it is now an environmental hazard, right? So it's a whole thing. But
what's interesting, Ananya, and this is in Ethiopia. I won't obviously say the location. It's a large hospital, large project, and really, really lovely people, supported by America, and through an external funder. I'm sure we'll talk about our biomedical engineering course later, but we've got an online biomedical engineering course, which again, because we're obviously experienced, comes with a professional toolkit and stuff, so they can really, really do their job. So they were so thrilled with this, and they've built onto the hospital. They've got a lot of operating rooms to equip, and they're talking about sending a whole bunch of stuff out from America with a kind of hybrid approach. And I could, there's such nice people, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but I could weep because it's, first of all, there is one of the things is there's money in the system. There is money in the system. Actually, we're good at keeping the prices down. So actually, to do this project, relatively speaking, for the outcomes concerned, is low. And with by using the gifts in kind, we could really sort of really do a great job, and it would be properly, because we're not charging project management fees, although we are project management. We're not charging consultancy, and they're talking about a hybrid approach, sending monitors and all sorts of stuff from the States. They'll be on the wrong voltage, so on and so forth. And the thing is, it's already had a kind of 3, 4, 5, 6 years worth of life working in America, and it's now got to do life moving onwards. Whereas, and particularly with electrical stuff, the the technology moves on so quickly, you know, and also prices are dropping, that the money would far be better invested in monitors that first of all worked on the Ethiopian voltage. And it's really, and it's, but we could literally, whether it's maternity units, whatever, ICUs, the operating rooms, if you break it down, and the sort of the medicine as well, like, it doesn't have to be complicated. And yeah, genuinely, at times we literally could weep when we see this stuff. A bit like the operating tables I just mentioned in Malawi. You just, like, what was going on?
Yeah, because I remember we had a discussion about this when you were equipping our theater in Gondar, and I insisted that it should be mechanical
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I know my setup. I understand that yes, electrical sounds fancy, uh, but is it practical in my setting? If it gets broken, is there somebody who's able to fix it? And are the people trained to properly use this equipment? Even the usage of the equipment matters, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, because
absolutely.
yeah, one of the things you guys did when you equipped the OR, where you came out to Gondar and you trained the biomedical engineers, you trained the nurses, you trained the anesthetists on the anesthesia machine, you trained us, the surgeons, the residents, everybody was exposed, right? So that they can understand how to properly use and maintain and manage the equipment. So that's really the backbone of it. And I mean, if the equipment is already too old, already incompatible with whether the electrical system or just the human system actually in the theater, then it's just going to be wastage of resources, and that's going to be very unfortunate. So that brings me to my next question, which is training. You're a trainer, okay? You're a great teacher. You've done training in UK universities, in special forces, and even in LMIC hospitals, like I just mentioned. So, what do you think should be at the core of biomedical engineer training? Because we have a program in Ethiopia. We do train biomedical engineers. The University of Gondar, one of the largest universities in the country, actually have a biomedical engineering uh, degree program. So what should be at the core? Because the reality that we see is the people, and I know they're trying their best within what is available to them, but they're really not equipped to cope up with how fast technology advances in the manufacturing world, right? Like you said, you have one model this year, next year, it could be a little bit of modification, or it could be a whole different model, right? Because there's also the commercial aspect of it. So, how do they cope up with that? And what should be at the core of it so that we would have good biomedical engineers who can be faced with any challenge, which is a whole lot more challenge than, the global north or
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So how do we do that?
So the first, it's such good questions. So I'm going to go around a bit in some history here, and but the fundamental thing, and myself, key members of my team have spent a lot of time in these environments. My medical director was consultant anaesthetist at an orthopedic hospital in Malawi, Cure Malawi, for 4 years, and worked at Queen's as well, kind of thing. So his son is in charge of my research. So just my head of biomedical engineering worked for Mercy Ships for 12 years and so on. So we have a lot of sort of collective experience in these environments. So the number one thing, and this applies to anything really, it applies to you as a surgeon when you know, what's the objective of this operation? What am I trying to achieve? So the first thing, because I'll take you obviously into the route of our biomed course as I do this, is what is your objective, kind of, and that's obviously based on kind of the realities on the ground, the realities of the environment in which you're working in. You sort of figure out your objective, and along the way, there is evolution in these types of things. But sort of, I've run team building courses of all sorts, and lead personal development courses. And one of the things we were always driving through to people is what kind of you've got to work out what you're trying to achieve. And so that's the first thing you need to ask here, because, and I'm sort of going to answer your question, but I'm going to go kind of in a slightly roundabout way. I think I've been doing this for about 23, 24 years now. And every single conference meeting you went to, everyone would talk about biomedical engineering support in LMICs. Now, biomedical engineering, anyway, is an interesting statement. It's a bit like saying you're a doctor. You could be a professor of cardiac surgery, you could be a physician, whatever. There's kind of lots of meanings of being a doctor, lots of types of doctors, lots of grades of doctors. And the same applies in biomedical engineering. And it means a very different thing in the West sometimes. You might be a biomedical engineer who spends your life doing research on CT scanners or something. So it's a whole different ballgame there, sort of thing. But everyone talks at these meetings about biomedical engineering and the challenges in the LMIC environment. And again, as I said earlier in this chat, this good chat, really good chat, I'm very much like a solutions person. If there's an issue and a problem, and I'm not frightened to challenge things, but I've got to do something about this. Now, we started to run for Mercy Ships a biomedical engineering training program that was residential, very visionary of them to do it. The course was it was very successful, but of course, we could only train a few people. We did Madagascar, Cameroon, Guinea, and I can't remember where the other place was. They were 8-week programs and all that. And this was before COVID. I mean, you're going back 12, 13 years, I think. Anyway, so I thought, as I say, well before COVID, what we've got to do is create an online version of this so that we can get the course accessed to everyone. Because I knew that through our work of traveling in LMICs, through doing installations, we would come across really motivated fixers in the hospital. Now, they might be called biomedical engineers, they might be called a states manager, they might be just a bloke down the road, down the corridor, who's just good at fixing stuff. And we found them incredibly motivated when we were in with them, very keen, clever, and they didn't have any tools. So, and it was extraordinary. I remember doing an installation in Rwanda. It was three operating rooms, the recovery, sterilization, rehab, that kind of stuff. And we don't always do ceiling lights. We often do mobile lights. This one involved 3 ceiling lights. And myself and my colleague, with these lads, we put up a ceiling light, which was fantastic. And they were just great lads. It was quite tricky because the build of the roof, the girder was it was a metal struts and it wasn't level. So it's quite difficult to get the thing level. And these lads were great. Anyway, me and Ed, my engineer, we disappeared off to go and do something. And we came back. And these lads, just through watching us, put up the next light. And it really struck me, I just thought, these lads, everywhere I'm going, these people that I'm coming across have got real natural talent. They love it when we teach them. We would always leave our tools with them. So I decided to put what we had done as a residential training online. Because the other issue I noticed when we did residential training is you didn't know who you were going to get. Okay. Some clearly had a natural flair and some didn't. So that was quite a big issue as well. So We put the course online. We've just added a couple of extra modules, actually, X-ray and the hospital laboratory. Very holistic, because I'm a very holistic thinker. So it included LMIC-based first aid. Included train the trainer. And the first aid trainer, a few operating room videos we've put on our academy page for anyone to use. And the Red Cross have used our first aid videos. Because as you can imagine, I was a civilian instructor for the Special Forces, so kind of done all their training, all my work in Africa generally and in other places. So the first aid course is very, very relevant to the kind of LMIC environment. That's what it's written for. Anyway, so we created 15 modules, I think it is. There's 70-ish plus videos, and the learning is very robust. It's accredited by city and guilds. But so, for instance, when they finish whatever, maybe it's health and safety module, there's a whole bunch of questions, multiple choice questions, which they have to get 100% before they can move on. Everything's done in sequence. They can take the MCQs as many times as they like, but we want robust and effective learning. So the question and answer order changes every time. So they can't kind of think, well, it wasn't A last time, it wasn't B, so it must be C or D, because it will change. So question 1 may become question 5. They might be answer D instead of answer A. So it's very robust learning. And we designed the system so that their bosses or their manager would get a report of how their students were doing, which is really good because they can encourage them. They can see how everyone is. We can see. And it's really interesting. You get all sorts of data back. And they would have to fill out a detailed but sensible evaluation form at the end so we could get feedback and indeed do some data research. Now, there's several things here. What was really exciting? Well, first of all, this worked because it was written by myself and my head of biomedical engineering, Tony, who had been in West Africa for 12 years with Mercy Ship. So he was really informed. Obviously, I was as well. We had a great time writing it. We had a professional. I mean, it cost me, I don't know, 150, 200,000 pounds to create this course. It was not a cheap thing to do. Again, you've got to invest in these things. It's got to be done properly. And out it went, and it was, the data we've got back. We are, because the other thing is, sorry that I haven't said, as part of the package, they get a really substantial professional toolkit. It includes things like multimeter. It's very holistic. So there's like soldering iron, head torch, fluorescent jacket. They get clothing with biomedical engineering on it, a bit like I'm wearing now. So it's about making them feel good, helping them to walk tall. They develop communication skills because of the train the trainer module, and it transforms their life. But so here's the interesting thing. There's loads of interesting things. So we've got so much evidence of how much it works. I mean, we had a really big teaching hospital in Kenya do it recently, and the biomedical engineering manager who did the course, when he'd finished, sort of said how wonderful it'd been. He just said everyone in Kenya should do this in every hospital, every engineer. End of. Now, we've had governments use it, and the government of Guyana uses it. They're just about to have another 30 courses. And they get textbooks as well, by the way, and it's available in English and French. And the whole toolkit is like the kind of grade that a garage would use, so it's very good quality and it will last. Well, here's the interesting thing, you see. There's lots of interesting things. One is that we've done webinars since with these people, which has been great. And we've offered on the ground training, but we've not done it yet. But the point is, the course acts as a selection tool, because to do the course, it takes about 30 hours, 25 to 35 hours. To do the course, you've got to do 73, 74 videos, I think it is, whatever. Go through all these units. You've got to sit down and work. And it shows initiative. It shows that you can do self-directed learning. It shows that you have an academic ability because you've passed in the course. It shows enthusiasm as well. And so that's point one. You've got proven knowledge. And if you have a bunch of students together on a webinar, if they've all done the course, then they've all kind of passed the interview. It's almost like selection type process. and which is really powerful. And as a teacher, if we're teaching them and we know they've done the course, we know they've got all this foundational knowledge, and we know what it is that they know, and we know also that they do have this intellect and that they do understand these things. So that's really powerful. And then so you've created foundational knowledge and networks for then building on, basically. And so that's point one. The other thing is that, and you can build on that, as I say, through webinars. You can build on it as well through on the ground training. Come back to those in a second in a bit more detail. What was really interesting as well, though, and we didn't. This goes to show about when you start things, and then we're seeing where it goes in a way, because I think this was so ridiculously simple. It's crazy, because obviously we're really into research. We want to get data, but as you've probably gathered and from working with us, we're very pragmatic. So if we're going to go collecting data, we need to find data that's going to tell us something, be of interest. So literally, I sat with Jonathan, my guy who's in charge of research, and I don't know, 35, 45 minutes, I rattled out a bunch of questions for operating rooms, and he put it into Google Forms. We just emailed all our biomed graduates at that time, and they do a very detailed operating room module as part of it. And, within 10, 14 days, we had so much data coming in from these guys because they had a relationship with us. They were motivated. And the thing about it is, they knew what they were looking at because they'd done our course. And they weren't intimidated by the environment either because they knew what they were looking for. It was kind of reflected in their body language, and the guys on the ground, their colleagues could see that. So, and you can see that report is on our website. It's in our research tab. You'll see, and it produced. And we had, in fact, so many engineers graduates in Malawi. We did one exclusively for Malawi, and so it produced so much data, and it was just using these biomeds through the relationships, and also, of course, biomeds they know everyone. So in Madagascar, we had to get a container to a hospital. We trained the biomeds there on our course. And I said to one, we were having issues getting the container in. So I spoke to other biomeds we trained, again, great relationship. He got it sorted and the container was cleared. So there's some really interesting aspects. But the point is, it is very clear when you do the program, and people who are listening to this now, if you go to our Academy webpage, meda.co.uk, you can find our Academy page. There's all sorts of sort of information about the research and so on. And it was really powerful because it was delivering to what they needed. It was giving them what they needed to know, not what we hoped they would know. Now, we collect a lot of data on this as it goes. And this isn't an exclusive statement, but it was just quite interesting. It doesn't happen all the time. We didn't monitor it that closely. But we happened to have a bunch of students, I can't remember how many, I think 4 or 5, who had done 4 years biomed training, I think a university in one country in Africa. In the same country, we had jobbing fixers in a hospital. They weren't even called biomedical engineers. They just fixed stuff on a daily basis. Now, it's not a particularly big deal, to be honest with you, but what is interesting, the fixers I think the guys from the university, it took them 3 times on average to get the MCQ modules correct and then move on. Whereas the guys who are the jobbing fixers, no formal training, were on the main doing it in 2. There's not a massive discrepancy, but what's interesting is they were doing it quicker, actually. So one of the things I think about the answer to your question is, and we've got in Ethiopia alone, we've got about 300 people who've applied to do the course. We had basically a foundation in America the Intuitive Foundation funded our course to do some research. And it's extraordinary because the first tranche was 70 students in 25 hospitals. That was kind of the Intuitive's brief over a variety of types of hospitals. And we advertised it. And it wasn't a dear Tim, please can I do your course? They had to fill out a detailed form. They had to be signed off by the hospital director and so on, a mission statement and everything. and for 70 places, we had 1,300 applications in 291 hospitals in 29 countries. Such was the demand. And we then did another lot, and I think it's up to about 2,000 now. And then there's 200 in it, as I say, in Ethiopia alone that want to do it. And this is where, obviously I'll only let you jump in, but this is, I used the word earlier about sadness and stuff. What makes me sad is this course is so powerful. Can you imagine if I had 200 people in Ethiopia have done our course? I mean, the hospital that did it recently in Ethiopia absolutely cannot get over how it's transformed them, and they're walking tall. I had an email about it the other day from London Lead Surgeons and everything. Can you imagine the infrastructure you've got if 200 and the knowledge? Now, clearly, we have to charge for the course. You can get bulk discounts, obviously, because of quite a bit. Some of the course is freight. And what's sad is we can't get, in the main, funders to do this, because it is really effective and you can then build on it. And that's the thing. Even if you then take them to the university, or even if they don't do anything after, quite frankly, the fact that they've been, because our course talks about how to fix stuff, as you can imagine, you know, they've got a phenomenal toolkit, and so on. I was in Uganda recently, and the hospital where I was at, we'd done an OR, and there'd been a massive. We put voltage protectors in, but there'd been a massive voltage surge, and the light had been damaged. The engineers just took the whole thing apart and fixed it. And A,
That's
they
amazing.
had the motivation. B, they had tools. Because it involved multimeters, it involved soldering and stuff. And that's a real tragedy because the networks that you get, as I explained earlier, are just absolutely extraordinary. And you've given these guys a future, and they are motivated. And, that when you talk to them, they've got knowledge. And we get stuff back. I saved someone's life because I put them in the recovery position. Stuff like, and we get stuff back. I feel much more happy to communicate now with the doctors because of the course. And so it's about objectives, and that's what we did. And as I say, my sadness is we can't. I've got 2,000. I mean, thousands and thousands that do it, but literally, just as a result of this funding from the Intuitive Foundation, who funded very kindly about 160 places, but we've got 2,000.
Yeah,
I could literally fill countries up with it.
I know.
Yeah.
There's obviously such a high demand. I mean, just the sheer volume of patients that we have, especially in Africa, the large population means large patient volume as well. So you really need well-trained um, biomedical engineers. And I think, we're so used to, as medical doctors, to having this continuous education opportunities. And we don't see that the rest of our team and biomedical engineers are part of the surgical team. At least that's how I see it, because
Yeah, of course they are.
yeah, the equipment is like the extension of my body, especially as an orthopedic surgeon, where you're dependent on a lot of equipment to do what you do. So I need these people. They doctor the equipment that I use to doctor. So it's very essential, and I love that you've put out this course and resource for people, whether they already had uh, professional training within the field or they don't. So that's just amazing that it really does not require pre-qualification, but like you said, just pure interest, and the discipline to go through that intensive online training. So I love that. So we're going to go into the M word, which is manufacturing. I really believe that that's really where we're going to have a sustainable change when it comes to, issue of resources, physical resource in the African continent, or in Ethiopia specifically. So how do you envision sustainable local manufacturing in our setting,
Yeah.
in the African setting? What, from your
That
experience?
that's a really really interesting question, because we've never certainly we've never manufactured in LMIC. I mean, we don't manufacture much stuff anyway. We're now sort of manufacturing our own external fixator. We buy our operating tables in from um, Italy. Strange enough, though, it is actually, again, this is the interesting thing. Kind of, so we developed a wood fueled autoclave that took a 40-litre pressure cooker autoclave. It was an insulated metal frame, very with stuff that is incredibly sort of fireproof, and it's insulated, so you could do a cycle on hardly any wood, etc. And interestingly enough, had that taken off, and where it was in use, it staggeringly reduced infection rates because people weren't sterilising properly. But that was something that we actually would have had manufactured in countries, basically, because essentially would have been quite easy to do in terms of like, because if you're trying to make an external fixator to this, because we don't compromise on standards, so our external fixator is made by a British orthopedic company, but it's an absolute fraction of the price of the Western stuff, and it's reusable. So in order to maintain sort of regulatory quality, that's what I have to do. But things like the Ecoclave, as we had then, could easily have been made in Africa, and it would have been a lot easier transport-wise to do that. But and this is the big but as well with anything, actually, you need the government to kind of be on your side so that you can sort of do this stuff. To be honest with you, because it's not quite the same. But so we saw, or I saw with some others, the president of Liberia about a year ago. One of the projects is a multifaceted project, again, money based. It was based about biomedical engineering all throughout the countries, just like we've said, re-equipping some hospitals, also re-equipping all their ambulances. And actually, the ambulance thing and training people up to do the first aid, that wasn't that complicated at all. The issue is actually, it's a logistics issue in terms of having a framework to resupply the ambulances with like the bandages and so on. And we did have an in-country partner who could do that. Again, the sadness is all very achievable, not complicated, takes some common sense, can-do approach, and it's literally down to money. So in terms of manufacturing, we've not really got to that point. Obviously, you're up against, and this is a big problem we have, people buying really cheap, very poor quality Far Eastern goods. Obviously, the Far East makes some very good equipment, well, whether it's a phone or whatever. But there's some incredibly cheap and nasty medical equipment that comes in. And so you're kind of up against that as well. So we haven't got any real, I think 100% it's possible, totally possible. Even on our external fixator, to be honest, if I suddenly had hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands to make, we could easily look at putting a production facility, because it's actually quite simple to make, actually, into Africa, without a shadow of a doubt. And I would love to do that. I think the challenge, the challenge isn't actually practical. I don't think the challenge is practical, to be honest with you. Something complicated like an operating table, I'd be much less inclined to. But some things, the external fixator could be, for instance. But you do need the cooperation of the kind of system, because we both know, for instance, Ethiopia is really tough. It's legendary in terms of getting stuff into. But we've always got stuff in there, always. Because we do kind of due diligence, if you like, to make sure it's going to go through. We do all the paperwork, so on and so forth. But I think a key part, my basic answer to that is you need it. There's definitely potential to do it. They have great skill base and so on, but the governments, yeah, if I had a really good link with your government or wherever, um, I would, and I could definitely make things happen of some manufacturing, as long as you didn't get stuck
Yeah.
with insane amounts of red tape, which basically didn't make it worthwhile. And
Mm.
that I would argue goes beyond into other areas. Essentially, without getting obviously time's limited,
Yeah.
it's very easy to save lives in LMIC and
Mm.
in LMICs. And we've sent operating facilities deep into the DRC. They've set it up themselves in a couple of hours and then done it, over 3 days, 11 C sections.
Mm.
It's not
Impossible.
the medicine isn't complicated. You
Mm.
work with the end users, send all the training stuff and so on. It really, really isn't. And I've got quotes from people saying you've virtually wiped out maternal mortality where we've re-equipped. And I'm not knocking myself really. It's joined up thinking. It's nothing
Yeah.
rocket science, as we would say in the UK.
Mm.
And sort of that's always my sort of frustration and sadness. So, as I say, if a government came up to me and we could genuinely get round the systems, I could 100%
Yeah.
produce and or distribute. So I could set up distribution centres.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
you know, it's that really. I mean, if someone came to me tomorrow to say we'll fund all the biomed courses in Ethiopia, I'd set up an in-country
Mm.
setup
Mm.
because it would create the funds to do it, and whoever you're dealing with would probably help with that. To be honest with you, but it would create the funds because as a social enterprise, we're reinvesting profits anyway.
Mm.
So we would. That's kind of what. So and then from there we would do ongoing training. We'd work out proper strategy and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
As I say, success breeds success.
Yeah. Wow. What's the role of all these major biomedical manufacturers that dominate the global supply chain? Do they have any role in supporting or accelerating local manufacturing capacity in LMICs, you think?
Sure. So, do you mean the people making the equipment, or the people making the actual people making whatever equipment is, sort of
Yeah, like
monitors or yeah,
Zimmer, whatever, all
yeah,
this. I mean,
yeah,
I say Zimmer because it's the easiest to come to
yeah, yeah,
mind, but any
yeah,
of those
yeah.
huge, big manufacturers, yeah.
That is an exceptionally good question, and the answer is they should have a lot more. I think, um, we've been around a long time, and one of our strengths is we know pretty well how industry thinks, and we are very, very respectful that industry has um, to make a living, if you like. So we don't march in and say, "Give us this stuff free for Africa because you should," because it's not really a way of having a relationship. It's also not sustainable. But you can, from that, it's interesting what you can get free actually, but you want to have a long-term relationship where they'll support. Um, and it's sort of slightly, I'm never, it's not that I want to be controversial. Lots of these big companies have CSR budgets, corporate social responsibility budgets, but accessing them is really hard. So the answer to your question is they should do. In my view, being controversial, I don't know if it's controversial or not actually. Just in my experience, whether that's true, not true, I don't know. Some will give you a really good price, and that's good um, on equipment, and they will work with you. But I think I've tried to get access to corporate social responsibility funds, or for instance, on a project recently, the burns unit. I used to work in burns as well. There's so many needs, whether it's fistula or whatever. But in this instance with burns, where you particularly need kind of paraffin gauze type dressings and so on, and I used to work for the company that made the stuff. I tried everything, and they wouldn't even respond. You know, and this was not an insignificant project that I was doing, and it's because it sort of didn't. Basically, they often wanted it to link with a commercial. So in some way, they wanted to benefit them commercially. That's what I've found. And so my discussion point would be with industry. Yes, some industry will do great jobs supporting LMIC, um, but LMICs. But I think, I think often that some of the best projects, no, that's not true. But
Mhm.
they forget that some of the amazing projects are done by the smaller organisations. So you take Richard and the team, Rotary, Leicester Hospitals, all of what they've achieved in Gonda. And, you were basically the orthopaedic doctor there.
Yeah.
But now they've got, I
Oh,
think, was it 6 consultants, something ridiculous,
oh
and all
yeah.
this, and they're doing two
With
lists
some
a
special.
day. The
Yeah.
amount of war wounded they did I
Yeah.
mean, it's too great. It was just incredible, you
Yeah.
know, and it was done by a small organisation. That's my point.
Mm.
And so, it's not all about being able to post, somewhere that we've given this massive charity
Mm.
something, and they need to be giving medical aid internationals and Rotaries, whatever, on a much smaller basis. I would suggest, that, and I would, in terms of this dressings, this situation, I really tried hard, and I'm pretty good, and we got absolutely nowhere, and it went without any, and that really made me sad because I know how desperately paraffin gauze dressings, for instance, are needed in these places. Um, so, because the trouble is, I don't know how many people listen to this, etc., but it's a very socially media driven world,
Mm.
and in a very media type um, thing. And we do get, great donations. People don't bat an eyelid, and they're not interested in publicity.
Mm.
But I think the big companies, if I was to be invited in to a big company now and say, Tim advises on how to spend our CSR, I would say you need to give it out. Yes, give it to the big global players, of course, but you also need to be giving it out to
Yeah.
small organisations, such as we just said.
Yeah.
And there's lots and lots, and you need to make the application process very simple, and you
Mm.
don't have to give a 90,000 word report every month. Not, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow.
And
That's very
yeah,
interesting. Yeah. Um, because you see, what there's this disconnect for me because during the time of COVID, there was a lot of local manufacturing, like whether it's
mm,
N95, whatever, whether it's a mask, whether it's the hazmat masks, whatever we needed, it kind of just happened really fast, and there
yeah,
were a
yeah,
lot of countries that were doing local manufacturing, which
mm,
I don't think would be much different. For example, with a gauze and a mask,
mm.
like it's just the material is very similar. We're not talking about like a very complex design or anything, right?
No, no,
So
you're not.
it's amazing to me how that can be done, but why is this not being done? But like you said, there's a lot of factors that play in it. So, and also all this major manufacturers, when I'm talking about specifically orthopedic manufacturers, they have good foothold in countries like South Africa. um, and I think it has something to do with the health insurance system as well, getting compensation. I mean, they're for profit, so obviously
Mm,
it needs to have some sort of profit to invest in local manufacturing. And
yeah,
um, there's just too many, uh, what do you call it? Too many bodies involved, whether it's the government, whether it's whether it's assessing that whether it's profitable or not, and things like that.
mm.
Um, so, but also like some equipments, how do we make them to be an appropriate technology for a resource restraint constrained setting? Because what you mentioned earlier, you don't need something very advanced. Sometimes you just need something very simple, very
Absolutely.
practical, easily maintainable, right? So
Yeah, 100%.
how do we do that without local manufacturing? You know?
So I think, yeah, it's really interesting. I think, you're saying about making stuff locally, and one thing we all know this in life, it's about your motivation, kind of that's a key factor, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, and so because we've it's called the MedAid fix, which is um, which is an absolutely low LMIC based external fixator that absolutely delivers for really complex fractures. I designed it with a good mutual friend of ours. You may know Steve Mannion. And I could easily have that made in Africa to the standards that we need. So that's kind of point one. I think the challenge, because also I'm going to just, that's one thing to say. I just want to say another thing as well, before I come on to what I think is a point I've already touched on, which is a good example, interestingly enough, is anesthetic machines, because there is a very good LMIC based anesthetic machine that we supply a lot of. But we have found situations where anaesthetists, not in Ethiopia, have refused to use it because they want something that looks modern. Now, it's back down to what I said right at the beginning of this discussion. It's about achieving their objectives. Now, the LMIC anesthetic machine requires no maintenance, has slightly higher gas, it has higher gas flows, but it doesn't require soda lime. Can be fixed by anyone if it does have a problem. It has a built-in oxygen concentrator and all sorts of stuff. It is designed for this environment, but literally refusing to use it. And we sort of, I have had conversations where people just will not even consider an LMIC based anesthetic machine because they want it to look posh, basically. And we can manage it because we can put in compressors to these anesthetic machines. We put in spare oxygen cylinders and stuff to go on the machine.
Mm.
But it is quite bizarre when you talk to an anaesthetist who's blatantly refusing to use an
Mm.
anesthetic machine because it doesn't look so posh, basically.
Interesting.
And it is really interesting. And so that's kind of sort of, I think, all along though, the thing is that there is no, and with these things one has to start, and you can do all sorts of stuff. And as I say, if someone came to me and said, we want to do manufacturing and you could cut out the roadblocks, and I'm grown up enough to know that you've got to do things systematically, if you like. Of course you have, but no blatant roadblocks that completely stuff you when you're trying to do this, then you definitely, there's stuff you could absolutely do. They're very, very capable in these places. Um, as I've said to you all along, very capable. And it's been fascinating, even with the biomed graduate data, to see how well they've done and everything.
Yeah.
Um, so it definitely could be done, that's for sure. And one does need to just start.
Mm.
Um, but you also need to sort of remove the roadblocks,
Mm.
sort of that's um, that is the kind of that's the crux of it, really.
Mm. That adds a whole different layer because we were talking about all the pieces that have to be moved to have local
Mm,
manufacturing, and then now you have the people who actually use the technology refusing to use the technology. So there's this psychological aspect of it about
yeah, yeah.
acceptance. So it's a really complex problem, and I
Mm,
just hope for the sake of our patients and the well-being of the population, all parties that are involved must
mm,
really have to come together and um, work towards local manufacturing, because there is something that's undeniable right now, which is rapid technological advancement, whether it's in robotics. We now have AI and AI enabled devices, automation, and whatnot. So there is a growing concern about the future workforce in any field, and biomedical
mm.
is not spared. So I don't know, what do you hope to see in the coming few years? And how can we ensure
Sure.
that this advancement actually enhances human capacity instead of completely replacing it?
I think what I would sort of, because it's interesting, there's been some really good technology that is really helping. And just as an example, 'cause I think it's a really interesting example. In the past, when we were asked to provide an X-ray solution, trying to send an X-ray room was just totally impractical, and it also had to be installed. So what we would send was your standard mobile X-ray machine, which would do the job well, but they required a freighter aircraft. They were very, very expensive to send because they weigh a lot. You've now got these X-ray machines that are basically the X-ray head is the size, sort of, I don't know, sort of if you put a pair of shoes together and a pair on top, it's about that size. It's ridiculous, and they can go on a camera tripod even, and we've done that. And we've had people take these X-ray machines as luggage numerous times to Africa. It is absolutely extraordinary technology. They're powerful enough to do, chest, pelvises, etc. And they have game changed X-ray. Unfortunately, the company that make them sort of will not reduce the prices, for use in these, but they're still, extraordinary piece of equipment, and they come with, you can get AI for them, and certainly the AI that I've seen on chest, I think they do skeletal, is really good. So that's been a really big, interesting development for a start. But what sort of, I'm not sure if this answers your question, but the bottom line is, for so many, well, for all sites, to provide solutions, whether it's in maternal health, the operating room, whatever, it really, really, really does not have to be complicated. And you can supply fantastic resources that work simply and effectively in the LMIC environment. For those projects, we always put in free biomed courses anyway. So what I would like to see, my dream ticket is release of release of funds, basically, so that people stop buying $2,000 operating tables, which fall apart, and start buying proper equipment, basically. So, and I would, I think there's so, I'd love to see the biomeds invested in. We've got a solution and it's not being utilised. So, and I think we mustn't. I think there's some great technology out there, and it'd be interesting for you as a surgeon for your view on this. But the sort of, we hear lots about laparoscopic surgery. And I was involved in a gasless system that was designed by Leeds University. You could essentially put a device into the umbilicus and pull up, and it worked really well, actually. But because the fact is, in the middle of nowhere, they can't get the inflation gas and so on. So sort of, and yet you see people teaching laparoscopic surgery. So whether that does or doesn't have a place is an interesting. I'm not sure, really. I'm sure it does in the big teaching hospitals, um, uh, but as long as you've got sustainable equipment. So I think technology. Personally, I think technology has to be used very wisely. I personally, there might be big centres where you can use robotic surgery, but I personally am not. Don't I'm I don't against sort of the time to do the operation, maybe the amount of training and resources being put into maintaining that. Could the energy and money be used elsewhere? Is kind of the question. And I come back to kind of your objective is to treat the patient, and it's to do that. We need to do that as simply as possible, equipment wise, with robust equipment that is sustainable and designed for the environment, very easy to maintain, and you know, the lives we could save would, and not just save, but like in terms of, you know, if we could, my dream is that our external fixator can be distributed everywhere, so fracture care can be done better. And if we can start to treat fractures better initially with proper debridement and, for instance, and stabilization, but just in general, we're talking about orthopedics, so that will help us improve the standard of care at a much wider level, because kind of you're starting to put in place with infrastructure that can treat the patient. So quite where it goes, I think my message is really kind of focus on the objective and use, don't overthink the problem in many respects, and work really closely with the end users. Um, like at Gonda, we did reconnaissance. We spoke, you were key in chatting to you about what all the things were that needed doing, etc. We had a good knowledge of the types of patient and so on. And that is just, I quote the Gonda scenario so much because essentially it's kind of, as you would say in the UK, chicken and egg, which came first. But the fact of the matter is, and I hear this a lot, if you put in place, I heard it the other day in a project in the DRC, you put in place equipment where you as a clinician can do your job, then A, you're going to stay,
Yeah.
and B, you're going to attract others.
100%.
Because why wouldn't you, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And which is exactly what's happening in Gonda. I mean, I was in Gonda. We were doing some stuff in the maternity department a year ago. I had a great visit up there, and they were now, as I say, doing 2 lists a day, like surgical lists a day, and the wards are full of really nasty injuries, all being treated. It was phenomenal. From the and Ethiopians were helping Ethiopians, kind of thing.
Exactly.
The Leicester team contribute clinically in a very positive way, but I'm always telling people,
Yeah.
you guys are doing far more operations than we are, kind of thing. So we can learn just as much from you. It's very much both ways, very much so. And it's, really, that's really exciting. But it is, but I think there are some really good improvements in technology. So just briefly going back to the X-ray machine, I said in Gaza, they would use this tiny X-ray machine when doing gunshot wounds in theatre, then take it out and do someone's chest, just in outpatients.
Yeah.
And that was taken on a plane.
Wow.
To get it there.
Yeah.
So there's some really good stuff coming through, actually. But
yeah, it's just I have this genuine fear that, as usual, Africa and any other low middle income country might be left behind in advancement of technology, because when technology advances, there's a different target group that's in mind, and they're starting from here and going to here, while majority of the population that reside in low middle income country is still way down here when it comes to the use of technology and things like that. So I really think global health, global surgery is the arena where, when we think about quality healthcare, and when we talk about equity, all the players must be put into consideration. We're not just talking about surgeons. We're not just talking about nurses, midwives, health extension workers. Biomedical engineers are the backbone and the core of successful surgical endeavors, right?
Totally.
So
Totally.
we really have to pay attention and integrate, training such as yours and courses,
100%.
whether it's on site or online, and provide those for our colleagues, just to build a successful surgical system. So this was such an eye-opening conversation. I knew you were the right person for it, because it's really something I've noticed in my practice that need to be worked on, that we need to refocus our attention on this part of surgical systems that have been ignored for far too long. That actually goes beyond surgical systems. If you have someone to fix your oxygen concentrator, the same person can do the same thing in the ICU,
Absolutely.
in the medical ward, and things like that. So like biomedical engineering and the professionals go beyond just the surgical system. So it's really something that benefits the entire health system. And I think it's really important to highlight it and treat it as such um, early on, so that we can also keep up with the rapid advancement in technology that we see. So thank you so much, Tim. If you
Yeah.
have anything to add to that.
I think I agree with you totally. And it was interesting, the strategy we wrote for the president of Liberia, it started off with the biomeds because they are, what people don't realize is apart from the technical side, which is massive. So if I've got a biomed on site, and I've done this, where I've done an installation, did one in Kenya last year. It's our second OR we've done. We did pretty much the whole hospital, and two of the lads there had done our course, and I was there anyway. We did it. Well, we just had the theatre that we'd sent arrive, and having these two lads who'd done the course just made everything so easy. They were so knowledgeable. We had all the tools. But so that's kind of, but so I'm in total agreement with you. And sort of biomedical engineers is absolutely foundational, because the other thing it's foundational about is not only the skill base. You take your Ethiopia scenario, and it's exactly the same applies to any other country. You train these guys, you have got an instant source of access to information. That you can access these guys really sharpish. You can, send a Google Forms type questionnaire of 10, 20 questions, and you can start to get back information. And if you start sending stuff out, you've got on the ground coordination and all sorts, and they're motivated. So, and then it's foundational. It's like I use the term foundational for the biomeds, but as you build the health systems up, you can then, if you want to have laparoscopic surgery, you want to make sure you've got a decent table, and everything else is in place before you do it, kind of thing, or arthroscopic surgery, whatever. But you need the starting point to be quality, and it all makes everyone feel good anyway, indirectly, and that impacts patient care. So yeah, I'm into all of what you're saying.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much, Tim. Those are all gems that you've dropped, and I really hope it will help someone who stumble upon this video and listen to it and really open their eye, because that's what we're trying to do, is to have healthcare professionals to think systematically instead of just focused on their narrow professional fields, right? So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for the great advices and thoughts that you've shared. And hopefully you'll come back here sometime and we'll talk about all the great projects that you are now doing and what you're doing in the manufacturing arena as well.
Yeah. Love to. Lovely. Lovely to see you again. Really great.